After studying this module, you shall be able to know about the ethical issues in forensic psychology, ethical guidelines for forensic psychologists, ethical guidelines given by APA, Code of Ethics of British Psychological Society. Ethics may be seen as an application of moral psychological principles which are sometimes explicit but more than implicit. One distinguished characteristic of reasonably well developed professions is that they have sets of ethical guidance. It includes a brief review of some germane guideline drawing upon international and interprofessional sets of guidance. The focus of this module is chiefly on psychologists and particularly those undertaking work in forensic settings, for example, those working with prisoners. A basic conceptual framework is outlined as an empirical device into understanding and reflection upon the broader concepts of ethical decision making in forensic policy and practice. Now, ethical guidelines for professionals. The widely cited 4 principles of medical ethics as given by Baxter et al. 2005 are: 1. Respect for autonomy. 2. Doing good or beneficence. 3. Doing no harm or non-maleficence. 4. Acting with fairness or equality. Many professions would make similar explicit demands on their members. Indeed, as mentioned above, one important defining characteristic of an occupation with professional status is that there will be an ethical code. Ethical codes are designed to benefit both recipients of professional services and also the particular professionals themselves. But it is significant to keep in mind that although ethical guidance can be very useful in guiding behavior or expectations about behavior, it does not provide answers in a categorical and case-specific manner, nor will it or should it ever be so. When drawing on such guidance, it is essential that professionals possess a range of skills, including critical reasoning skills as well as drawing upon a clear moral compasness. Ethical decision making needs to be both well reasoned and fair minded. Now, American Psychological Association guidelines. The American Psychological Association set of ethical principles and the code of conduct have 2 key sections, one on general ethical principles and the other on ethical standards APA 2002. The 5 general underlying ethical principles are: 1. Beneficence and non-maleficence. Psychologists strive to profit those organizations or people with whom they work and take concern to do no harm. In their professional dealings, psychologists tend to take precautions about the benefit and right of those with whom they interact professionally and extra affected persons and the well-being of animal subjects of research. Conflicts are resolved in orderly fashion. Now 2. Fidelity and responsibility. Psychologists create associations of trust with those with whom they wish to work. They are conscious of their professional and scientific responsibilities towards the society and to the specific communities in which they live or work. 3. Integrity. Psychologists pursue to encourage precision, morality, and truth in the science, education, and practice of psychology. Now, 4th, justice. Psychologists make out the equality and fairness, give the right to all persons for access to and give advantage from the aids of psychology and to equal qualities in the process. Methods and services being conducted by psychologists. Psychologists uses rational judgment and take precautionary methods to make sure that their potential biasness, the boundaries of their competence and of their proficiency do not lead to or direct to unjust practices. Now, fifth, respect for people's right and dignity. Psychologists esteem the dignity and worth of all people and the rights of individuals to privacy, confidentiality, and self determination. Psychologists are well conscious that special measures may be required to ensure the safety of the rights and welfare of persons or communities whose vulnerabilities impair autonomous decision making. These are aspirations goals rather than specific rules of behavior or conduct. However, the ethical morals that follow from these principles are rules which are enforceable through the rules and procedures of the APA. Now, standards for American Psychological Association. The standards for APA are split into 10 sections. They are 1. Resolving ethical issues. In this, misuse of psychologists' work. If psychologists start misuse or misinterpretation of their work, they also need to take logical steps to accurate or diminish the extent of misuse or misinterpretation or completely avoid it. Second, conflicts between ethics and laws, regulations, or others governing legal authority. If a psychologist's ethical responsibilities are to fight with law, regulations, or any other governing legal authority, psychologists need to elucidate the nature of the divergence or fight, make known the obligations to the ethic codes, and take realistic and required steps to determine the conflict, keeping in mind the general principles and ethical standards of the ethics code. Next, conflicts between ethics and organizational demands. Reasonable steps to be taken by the psychologist to decide the conflict dependable with the general principle and ethical standards of the ethic code. Next, informal resolution of ethical violations. Whenever psychologists think that there had been an ethical violation or damage by another psychologist, they attempt to decide the matter by bringing it to the notice of the involved individual. If a casual decision appears appropriate and the involvement does not violate any confidentiality or privacy rights that may be involved. Next, reporting ethical violations. Such deed might comprise transfer to state or national committees on professionals and expert ethics, to state licensing boards, or to the suitable institutional authorities. Though this does not apply when an institution would violate confidentiality or privacy rights, or when psychologists have been retained to evaluate the work of a different psychologist whose professional conduct has been in question. Next, cooperating with ethic committees. Psychologists have to collaborate in ethics investigations, proceedings, and resulting requirements of the APA or any allied state psychological association to which they belong to. Next is improper complaints. Psychologists do not file or support the filings of ethic complaints that are made with reckless disrespect for or willful ignorance of the facts that will prove the allegation as false. Next, unfair discrimination against complainants and respondents. Psychologists do not refuse a person's employment, advancement, admission to academic or other programs, tenure or promotion based solely upon their having made or their being the subject of an ethics complaint. Second, competence. In this, boundaries of competence. Next is maintaining competence. Next, basis for scientific and professional judgments. Next, delegation of work to others. Next, personal problems and conflicts. Third, human relations. In this, unfair discrimination. Next, sexual harassment. Next, other harassment. Next, avoiding harm. Next, multiple relationships. Next, conflict of interest. Next, third party request for services. Next, exploitative relationships. Next, cooperation with other professionals. Next, informed consent. Next, psychological services delivered to or through organizations, interruptions of psychological services. Now, fourth, privacy and confidentiality. Maintaining confidentiality, discussing the confinements of confidentiality. Next, recording. Next, minimizing intrusions on privacy. Next, disclosures. Next, consultations. Next, use of classified information for edifying or other purposes. Now, fifth, advertising and other public statements. In this, avoidance of false or deceptive statements. Next, statements by others. Next, descriptions of workshops and non-degree granting educational programs. Next, media presentations. Next, testimonials. Next, in-person solicitation. Now, sixth, record keepings and fees. In this, documentation of professional and scientific work and maintenance of records is done. Maintenance, distribution and discarding of confidential records of professional and scientific work is also done, with holding records for non-payment. Next is fees and financial agreements. Next, exchange with clients, patients. Next, accuracy in reports to payers and funding sources. Next, referrals and fees. Now, seventh, education and training. In this, design of education and training programs are run. Next, descriptions of education and training programs are given. Next, accuracy in teaching. Next, student disclosure of personal information. Next, compulsory individual or ground therapy. Next, assessing student and supervisory performance. Next, sexual relationship with students and supervisors. Now, eighth, research and publication. In this, institutional approval. Next, informed consent to research. Next, informed consent for recording voices and images in research. Next, client, patient, student and subordinate research participants. Next, dispensing with informed consent for research. Next, offering inducements for research participation. Next, deception in research. Next, debriefing. Next, human care and use of animal in research. Next, reporting research results. Next, plagiarism. Next is publication credit. Next, duplicate publication of data. Next is sharing research data for verification. Next is the reviewers. Now, ninth, assessment. In this, basis for assessments. Next is use of these assessments. Next, well-versed consent in assessments. Next, release of test data. Next, test constructions. Next, understanding assessment results. Next is valuation by unqualified persons. Next, outdated test and obsolete test results. Next, test scoring and interpretation services. Next, explanation of assessment results. Next, maintaining test security. Now, 10th, therapy. In this, informed agreement to therapy. Next is therapy involving duos or couples and families. Next is group therapy. Next, providing therapy to those served by others. Next, sexual affections with current therapy clients or patients. Next, sexual intimacies with relatives or significant others of current therapy clients or patients. Next is therapy with former sexual partners. Next, sexual intimacies with former therapy client or patients. Next, interruptions of therapy. Next, terminating therapy. Now, the Psychological Society of Ireland (PSI). In this Code of Professional Ethics. Similarly to the APA, the PSI code is split into two sections, one on 4 overall ethical principles and the other on specific ethical standards. The PSI principles are: 1. Respect for the rights and dignity of the person. 2. Competence. 3. Responsibility. 4. Integrity. These principles are used as the headings for all the ethical standards listed. The code also contains two appendices which are informative and worth bringing to attention. Now, Appendix A of the code is entitled Recommended Procedure for Ethical Decision Making, which consists of a useful set of 7 points to guide the process of an informed ethical decision making process. It may well be a useful aid memory for policymakers and practitioners alike. The key point in this 7-point structure is that the individual is personally accountable for their decision making. Appendix B of the code usually lists potential parties who may be affected by ethical decision making. When the general public is referred to as a party affected by ethical decision making, it is perhaps culturally interesting or cultural context of any such code. Now, British Association for Counselling and Psychotherapy (BACP). Ethical Framework for Good Practice in Counselling and Psychotherapy. In this, one distinctive feature of this guideline is that it is structured merely with principles and standards, but from the onset contains an explicit set of value (BACP 2009). Here, importance is given to practicing with a high degree of cultural sensitivity to the needs of clients. Distinctively, there is an emphasis on a value base which appreciates the value basis of human experience and culture. Values inform principles. These values or principles are similar to those in the other ethical codes, with a possible exception being the emphasis of self-respect defined as fostering the practitioner's self-knowledge and care of the self. Unusually for a code of professional ethics, there is a section called Albeit Aspirational, which includes personal moral qualities. Moral qualities include empathy, sincerity, integrity, resilience, respect, humility, competence, fairness, wisdom, and courage. Having brief considered international code and a profession with a close theoretical and sometimes practical links with psychology, which means counseling and psychotherapy, we shall now focus upon the code for ethics and conduct of psychologists in UK, following some specific guidance for forensic psychologists. Now, the British Psychological Society (BPS) Code of Ethics and Conduct 2006. BPS adopted a code of conduct in 1985, which was revised over the years, but its improvement in quality was marked during 2006 only. There are links to powerful relationships. Related to it is the importance of individual responsibility and personal accountability for one's own action. On practical aspects, practitioners may find decision making useful for informing the development of local policies and practices. This code includes 4 ethical principles. 1. Respect. 2. Competence. 3. Responsibility. 4. Integrity. Now, specialist BPS forensic guidance. This guidance was informed by previous APA and BPS guidance and also a number of relevant papers which deflected divisional activities in this important area. All the work of forensic psychologists in court, police station, prisons, hospitals and community settings may arguably be constituted within this broader health and social care context. All professional relationship between power relationships. Such relationship may be helpful conceptualized at three levels: socio-political, organizational and individual. Clearly, forensic psychologists need to be mindful in their everyday practice and so do policy makers. If we look at the socio-politician domain, the state positively supports the work of forensic psychologists. At an organizational level, psychologists benefits from both the strong support of their employers and the support of professional bodies such as the British Psychological Society. At an individual level, psychologists are state successes with hopeful high levels of verbal intelligence and all the trapping or benefits of professional status. Now, summary. Ethics may be seen as an application of moral physiological principles. The five general underlying ethical principles are: 1. Beneficence and non-maleficence. 2. Fidelity and responsibility. 3. Integrity. 4. Justice. 5. Respect for people, rights and dignity. Standards for APA are split into the following 10 sections: 1. Resolving ethical issues. 2. Competence. 3. Human relations. 4th. Privacy and confidentiality. 5th. Advertising and other public statements. 6. Record keepings and fees. 7. Research and publication. 8. Education and training. 9. Assessment. 10th. Therapy. The PSI principles are: A. Respect for the rights and dignity of the people. B. Competence. C. Responsibility. D. Integrity. Unusually for a code of professional ethics, there is a section called albeit aspirationals, which includes personal moral qualities. More qualities include empathy, sincerity, integrity, resilience, respect, humility, competence, fairness, wisdom and courage. All the work of forensic psychologists in courts, police stations, prisons, hospitals and community settings may arguably be constructed within this broader health and social care context.